This video is a part of the Google Project Management Certificate, providing you with job-ready skills to start or advance your career in project management. Get access to practice exercises, quizzes, discussion forums, job search help, and more on Coursera. And you can earn your official certificate. Visit grow.google/projectcert to enroll in the full learning experience today. Communication is very important to every project. I'd even argue that it's the most important tool in making sure your project runs smoothly. Many times, what contributes to the success or failure of a project team comes down to whether or not everyone understands what's happening and how their tasks contribute to the project's goals. As project manager, you play a big part in making sure everyone knows what their roles and tasks are. You're also the person that team members come to when they're just in need of a quick answer, so being able to communicate clearly and effectively is key. It's important to remember that without effective communication, the project is at risk of missing important opportunities or even failing altogether. During a project I recently worked on, my stakeholders allocated a few design specialists to work with me. In the first week of the project, I noticed that one specialist wasn't attending any of the project meetings. I decided to approach the individual about their absence. When asked, they stated that they were well over capacity with the current workload and were unable to commit to the short deadlines I had been assigning. There were a couple of breakdowns in communication here. First, between the specialist and their manager. And second, between the specialist and me, the project manager. Ideally, the specialist and their manager would have communicated better with each other about the specialist's ability to take on the workload. If I had not communicated with the specialist, their continued absence at meetings could have resulted in lots of lost time, the project being delayed, or not being able to deliver the project in a satisfactory way. As it turned out, we only ended up losing a week of work due to the lack of communication. However, since I followed up quickly, we were able to pivot and assign another specialist to the project. So we know communication is very important. But what is communication exactly? To put it simply, communication is the flow of information. It includes everything that's shared, how it's shared, and with whom. Good, effective communication is always clear, honest, relevant, and frequent. But not too frequent. There is such a thing as information overload. Effective communication makes it possible for your project to run on time and up to the expectations outlined in the project plan. So take full advantage of tools like meetings, emails, phone calls, written documents, and formal presentations, and make sure they are accessible by everyone. It's also important to remember that communication is not a one-time event or a one-way route. It needs to happen throughout the entire life cycle of the project, from the project team and stakeholders, as well as from you. So be sure to clarify goals and client expectations, follow up on action items, and communicate delays as the project progresses. This will help you avoid issues and setbacks. As the project manager, you're responsible for creating a consistent flow of communication throughout the project. Setting the tone for team communication and working to make sure everyone's on the same page, every step of the way, gives your project the best chance to succeed. Okay, hopefully it's clear that communication is incredibly important to manage a project. Coming up, I'll show you how to make a communication plan that will help you manage all important communication. See you in a bit. So far, you've learned some common ways of communicating during a project. Let's take that a step further by learning how to create a communication plan that will help you manage all the different kinds of communication that will happen during a project. Trust me, there's going to be a lot of communication, so you'll need a plan to help you stay aware of it all and to use as a tool for communicating effectively. A communication plan organizes and documents the process, types, and expectations of communication for the project. The size and complexity of your communication plan will be different for every project, but it is always good to have one, especially when multiple stakeholders, different phrases, and change management are involved. It will really help you, your project, and the stakeholders. Just like other plans related to the project, your communication plan needs to address these questions. What needs to be communicated? Who needs to communicate? When communication needs to happen? Why and how to communicate? And where the information communicated is stored. Let's break down each question with a sample communication plan that I've created for our Plant Pals project. First off, your communication plan should include what you're communicating on, or in other words, the type of communication. This could include things like status updates, issues, feedback from users, daily check-ins, and other types of project meetings. Then, you need to identify who you'll communicate with. These are the recipients of the information, like key stakeholders and the core project team. For each type of communication, record when to communicate. This includes the frequency, which is how often you'll communicate, and key dates like deadlines or major meetings. One thing to keep in mind is that not everyone needs to receive the same amount of information at the same time. Generally speaking, your key stakeholders will get their information less often, like in a monthly high-level summary email or project review meeting. But your core project team could receive more detailed info through daily email updates or quick virtual check-ins. Next, include how you'll communicate or what delivery method you'll use. This could be email, in-person or virtual meetings, or a formal presentation. Your plan also needs to include the goal of communicating. This is your why. So ask yourself, why are you communicating? Is it to give a progress update, identify a risk and address barriers? Or perhaps you need to figure out next steps, detail preparation plans, and reflect on lessons learned. The goal of communication could be a combination of any of these, or some other reason altogether. In either case, there must be a purpose for communicating, otherwise you risk wasting valuable time. Finally, include where communication resources are located, along with any other notes. I'll talk more about best practices for storing information in the next video, but for now, try to remember that relevant information should be easily accessible so that you, your stakeholders, and your team can quickly find the resources they need to make decisions, work on tasks, get caught up, or provide updates. One more benefit to an effective communication plan is that it allows for continuity of the project's operations. If a new project manager comes onto the project and sees the plan, they should be able to quickly access past meeting notes and documentation, as well as current and upcoming communications. The communication plan also helps with effective change management, the process of delivering your final project and getting it successfully implemented. When others have access to the communication plan after you leave the project, they'll be able to fix any problems that might come up, make decisions, or apply similar processes to a new project. Hopefully by now, you're feeling more familiar with the ways a communication plan can lead your project to success. Keep in mind, this is just a basic plan, and there are lots of other ways to structure one. It all depends on what kind of project you're working on. Up next, I'll take you through the details of a communication plan and show you how to use it to manage project communications effectively and efficiently. Now that you know what a communication plan is and the basic categories that go in it, the next step is filling in your plan. In this video, you'll learn how to set up a communication plan that works best for all the different people involved with your project, and what kind of information to include in your plan. Things like who needs to be involved in the project communication, what's the best way to communicate, why are you communicating, and how often should you communicate. there are a few key benefits to planning your communications upfront. Creating a communication plan helps improve the overall effectiveness of communication, keeps people engaged and motivated throughout the project, and gets stakeholders involved in effective conversations. Let's try building a sample communication plan so you can see how it helps with managing the different aspects of project communication. We'll continue with the Office Green Plant Pals project. Here's an example of a basic communication plan using a spreadsheet. Before anything else, think about what types of communication you'll be using throughout your project. Feel free to refer back to your RACI chart and stakeholder map, which are tools that will help you figure out what type of communication might work best for each person, group, or role. In this example, let's say the stakeholders are busy senior executives who may not need day-to-day details. So instead of daily meetings, it's better to send a newsletter that summarizes key milestones and project progress to date. Let's type that in. The core team, on the other hand, may benefit from a daily stand-up, which is a daily meeting designed to bring everyone up to date on key information. Here, each team member briefly describes any completed work and any barriers that stand in their way. This is common in agile project management, as it helps the team stay coordinated and move quickly throughout the project. So, we will go ahead and enter daily stand-ups in this row. But sometimes, daily meetings aren't possible for given time zone restrictions or other obligations. Don't worry, there are other ways to keep communication flowing. For example, the project team that created this program had daily email status updates for the whole team to report which action items were being worked on for the day. They also used a project tracker for tasks and milestones to make sure everyone's on the same page. Next up, think about who needs to receive information about your project. These are the communication recipients. It helps to look back to the stakeholder map and RACI chart again. Ask yourself, who needs to be heavily involved in the details? Who has high interest in the project? Who needs only to be informed of major milestones? I already mentioned that key stakeholders would be receiving a monthly newsletter, so I'll type that in now. Also, we know that the core team will be participating in daily stand-ups, so I'll add that in as well. Excellent. We're moving right along. Next up in recipients are the project subgroups for marketing, procurement, and product development. Let's add separate meetings in for each of those groups in addition to the core team meetings. Since those subgroups are not part of the core team, you might only want to meet with them weekly instead of every day. Let's add weekly check-in to each of these. Great. Another best practice is to list contact information and time zones in your communication plan. That way, you know when people are available for communicating. Let's add that in. Feel free to hide this column, since it contains sensitive information about people involved in your project. There are other ways to list contact information privately and link it for easy reference. I'll teach you how to do that in another video. If you're having trouble deciding which type of communication to use, one way to help you choose is by thinking about the frequency. As I mentioned earlier, a senior stakeholder probably won't be able to attend daily meetings, and they don't need every piece of information. Instead, you can communicate with a senior stakeholder on a weekly or monthly basis, and you can focus on high-level status updates like overall progress, recent wins, or milestones reached, and current metrics. In this case, let's send out the project newsletter once a month. If you're unsure, it's always great to ask senior stakeholders which method of communication works best for them. When you work with your core team on a project, you need to get into more of the day-to-day details. Check in regularly and ask how everything is going, how they're doing on tasks, and do they need your help with anything. adding a daily meeting for your core team and a weekly meeting for the subgroups. Let's make that happen. Great. Meeting more frequently can help unblock issues and keep the project on the right track. This leads us to key dates. Listing key dates and times are important for coordination. For example, if you're launching a product or new process or giving a presentation, you should list the key dates. Keep in mind, not every type of communication needs a specific key date listed. For example, with daily or weekly communications, you might not need to specify the actual date every week. You could just list every Monday or something like that. Let's add in key dates to our plan. For the monthly newsletter, let's send that on the first Monday of every month. Let's schedule the daily stand-ups at noon. And the weekly check-ins are on Wednesdays at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock. Wonderful. Now let's talk about delivery methods, like email, in-person, and virtual meetings. A shared document that gets updated regularly, or a progress report that gets presented. Deciding the best way to communicate is a skill. One thing I continuously need to adapt and work to improve in my role as project manager is communicating among different teams and levels of authority. A director or executive may only have 5 minutes, so I need to be concise and know exactly what I need from them. Likewise, I might be used to communicating via instant message and video chat with my core team. However, one of the subgroups on the project might respond better to emails and in-document comments. Let me add in these methods for our communication plan, starting with email. Emails are a very common way to get people in sync, but write too much and you may lose your audience. After all, no one really wants to read a 2-page email. One way to get around this is by adding a note at the top of your email. This will alert readers that some details of a long email may not be relevant to them. With this kind of email, lead with key points and action items, limited to 2 to 3 sentences. Then include a longer section at the bottom for those who want or need additional details. The goal of communicating is getting your point across effectively. So think carefully about what you need to accomplish with each type of communication. For high-level stakeholders, in particular, I'm constantly trying to answer, so what? Why should they care about my project? The same goes for my core team. What information is going to help make sure they complete tasks on time and stay motivated? Thinking about these questions helps me focus on the most important bits of information to share. So let's fill this in the communication plan. The goal of the monthly newsletter for stakeholders is to give a status update overview. Great. And goals for the daily stand-ups with the core team would be to report progress updates, blockers, and determining next steps. So let's add those in as well. All set. Next, you need to make sure you're able to reach everyone you need to communicate with. So it helps if communication is a team effort. Especially on more complex projects, you shouldn't be the only one communicating. You want to enable other team members to be involved in communications based on their expertise in the project. I'll add a column for sender and owner to indicate who is responsible for each communication. Then I'll add the sender or owner for each of these communication types, starting with the project manager as the sender for the newsletter. Great, and we are all done. Keep in mind, it's always a good idea to check in with everyone to make sure communications meet their needs. Everyone absorbs information differently. What works best for you doesn't always work best for others. Some people are more visual and want to see charts and graphs. Some people might prefer to listen to information through a presentation or a meeting. Some people may want to review and analyze information on their own first and then speak with someone about what they've read. So, if you're only presenting information in just one or two ways, you risk engaging some people but not others. Your goal as project manager is to optimize and streamline communications. A great way to optimize your communications for everyone on the team is by sending a brief email or survey that asks 3 questions. What is working in how we communicate with you about the project? What is not working or is not effective in our communications? Where can we improve our communications with you? This will give you plenty of useful information on how you can adapt the communication style to cater to each team member. Communication plans contain a lot of important information, and there are so many different ways to set one up, depending on the size of your team and the needs of your project. Whichever system you choose to use, the most important thing is to make sure your communication plan clearly identifies who needs to be involved in project communication, what methods are being used to communicate, why are you communicating, and how often you are communicating. So that wraps up our discussion on how to effectively fill in a communication plan. In the next video, I'll share with you some best practices for documenting all the information you and your team will be communicating throughout the project. See you in a bit. Now that you're here, let's talk about the importance of documentation and how it serves as a form of communication for others to reference and contribute to. I'll share an example with you. Once I worked on a project that involved several teams, from quality assurance, testing, design, partner engineering, and program managers. Each team was responsible for their own set of deliverables. To keep all teams on the same page, it was important for everyone to store their plans and reports in one centralized place. This allowed any team member to quickly find the documents they needed. Documentation storage and sharing is very important. Having plans in one place makes communication quicker, easier, and more streamlined, because everyone knows where to find any information they need. And just as important is making sure your files are stored with clear labels or organized into folders. For example, on my team, we have certain reports stored in one central place. This makes it easier for teams in different countries to find and share their research with each other, which optimizes workflow and reduces duplicate work. Documenting and organizing plans also provides visibility and accountability. Your project plan is a great example of this. Each task has an owner and a due date. This creates visibility for the members of the project team and accountability for the task owner. It's common for members of the team and senior stakeholders to reference your project plan and associated documents when they need a refresher on timelines or milestones. So having up-to-date plans will help ensure there's no room for misinterpretation or miscommunication. Once you've created a centralized location for your documents, it's time to think about managing permissions of your files and folders. If someone isn't a core part of the project team, you might not want them to have full access to all of the meeting notes. Instead, summarize the relevant information into a status report for those who need to stay informed of final outcomes, but don't need all background information. There's another big benefit to setting up your project plans and centralizing them in one place: continuity. As the project manager, there could be times when you need to suddenly leave the project. Say you got sick, transferred to another project, or needed to take a leave of absence. Another project manager may need to step in, and if all the project information is scattered across unorganized personal notes, it's not very helpful. But if you documented all the plans in one place, the new project manager can find everything they need and pick up right where you left off. So, it's always useful to store guides, manuals, meeting notes, plans, and processes all in a centralized place and clearly labeled. You'll also want to make sure the people in relevant roles are granted access to those documents. So even if you're not present, the project can carry on. As project manager, it's your job to ensure that project data can be accessed in the future by others. Documenting your plans and making them available is part of a project management best practice called knowledge management. If someone needs to review this project for making decisions or planning similar projects, they should be able to easily access the information they need. It also helps set the tone for future projects and future project managers, which can be incredibly helpful if you happen to be the one jumping onto a new project. For example, if an architect is working on a kitchen remodel and they want to make a decision about the design, they can look at the old project plans to understand why the decision was made to put the sink in a certain location. Or if a new architect comes in halfway through the remodel, they might want to know why the other architect designed the plumbing a certain way. By looking at the old plans, they can go back and get the information and context they need to move forward with more informed decisions. It's also important to determine what kind of information to share with whom and when. Focus on the key information related to what specific individuals need to know. Think about this scenario. A project manager who's working with all the VPs at their company decides to send out daily updates. From a communication standpoint, what could be the potential impact of the project manager's decision? Well, since VPs get lots of emails, they're not likely to read the updates. That ends up being a waste of time for you. Also, when you send a lot of unnecessary information, then it's hard to tell what's really important. Figuring out the right information to share is even more important when you're working on projects that have sensitive data. In those cases, you need to be very careful of how you share information about your project with stakeholders who do not have permissions to view sensitive data. For example, financial data or user survey results are often highly sensitive and should never be made available to unauthorized viewers. Here's another scenario. Let's say your team is working on a high-profile launch of a brand new product, say an electric car. Most people don't need to know all of the thinking behind the project or see all the draft versions, but they do need to know what the final design will look like. The project is legally sensitive, and you want to avoid leaks and oversharing classified data. If you share the entire project folder with everyone who needs to know only the end result, you risk doing just that, revealing highly sensitive and classified data. If this information gets leaked to the wrong people, project plans and company data could be made public, ruining the big launch of the electric car. You also risk violating company policy and damaging your reputation as a trustworthy and responsible project manager. Only share information on a need-to-know basis. It's your job to present the right information at the right time to the right people. Now let me show you an example. In this sample communication plan, one of the resources is user feedback surveys. This resource contains raw data collected from surveys submitted by PlantPow's test users, which means it has personally identifiable information, or PII. PII is anything that possibly reveals someone's identity, like a screen name, password, phone number, email address, first or last name, anything like that. For that reason, only share that resource with the members of the project team who are approved to access this level of information. Then, if anyone else tries to open the document, they will be alerted that they need to request permission to access it. If you need to share results of these surveys, those can be presented in a graph, chart, or summarized in a report without any PII included. Then you can share that information with the broader team. Now you have a better understanding of how important documentation is to project management. Coming up next, we'll learn the best way to put your plan together and stay organized. See you later. So far in this course, you've filled in or created some different project planning resources, like the project plan, budget, RACI chart, risk management plan, and now a communications plan. We also discussed the importance of organizing your communications and having easy and appropriate access to project plans. Now, I'll show you one way you can organize all your project information in one centralized place. You'll be able to apply these same general techniques to almost any type of project management style or system. Organizing your project plans makes everyone's job easier and eliminates opportunity for confusion. As a project manager, your goal is to have all of your project resources documented and linked in a way to where you or anyone on the project can access what they need quickly. A couple of handy ways to get organized are using a shared file drive like Google Drive and creating one resource like a document or spreadsheet that links all of the files and resources that your project uses. Here's an example of how to organize your files in Google Drive. But it doesn't matter which shared system your project team uses. You can use the same process for pretty much all of them. First, create a new folder and label it with the name of your project. Use this folder to store all your project files. You can even create subfolders and store them in the main project folder. You can also stay organized by creating a centralized planning document that links everything together. This can serve as a quick reference guide that you can use to find all your frequently accessed files in one place. Here's an Office Green example that's already been started. One at a time, select a resource name, then link it. Now you can access the file directly from the centralized document. If your project uses multiple spreadsheets and you want to avoid having to open lots of separate files, you can group them within one sheet, like this. This sheet has tabs for all the other sheets that contain project information. You can add a new sheet at any time. It's helpful to include an overview sheet and link any non-spreadsheet files. This is also a good place to provide a brief description of the project, instructions for how to use the sheet, or communication expectations. In this example, the overview sheet is called the dashboard, which is the same thing. You can decide how to label yours. There you have it. Now you're organized and ready to show everyone what an awesome project manager you are. You've done a lot of work so far. Let's take a moment to review all you learned in this course. First, you learned the key components of the planning phase and explored how proper planning ensures that milestones and tasks are completed. Next, you learned why it is necessary to create and manage a project plan, how to utilize time estimation methods to prevent project failure, how to get viable estimates using soft skills, and which tools you can use to build a project plan. Then, you learned what the components of a project budget are, how the budget process works, and the concepts behind estimating and tracking a project budget. And we discussed how the procurement process flows to manage paperwork, bids, proposals, and performance. You also learned about risk management and how it helps prevent project failure. You learned how to identify risks and measure their impact on a project, and how to communicate and monitor potential risks once they're identified. Finally, you learned how important it is to document plans. You learned how to organize plans to provide visibility and accountability, and what elements of a simple communication plan are vital to project success. In the next course, you'll continue on to executing and closing a project, where my colleague Alita will be your guide. She's going to teach you all about tracking and measuring project progress, risk management, using data to make decisions, and effective project communication. I had a wonderful time sharing my project management experience with you. Best of luck. Congratulations on finishing this video in the Google Project Management Certificate. Access the full learning experience, including job search help, and start to earn your official certificate by clicking on the icon. To view the next course in this video, click here and subscribe to our channel to learn more from Google Career Certificates.